My daughter-in-law threw my dinner plate on the floor, and my son laughed. But after the lesson I taught them that night, both of them ended up in the emergency room. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 65 years old, and I've lived in the same small town in Ohio my entire life. I never thought I'd see the day when my own son, the boy I raised with my bare hands, would tell me to know my place in his house. But that night, everything changed. It started like any other Sunday dinner. I had cooked my favorite roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, just like I used to when Daniel was little. But ever since he married Vanessa, those dinners have turned into a test of patience for me. She doesn't like how I cook, how I talk, or even how I sit. When I moved in with them after my hip surgery, it was supposed to be temporary, 2 months at most. But recovery took longer, and Daniel insisted I stay longer. Or maybe it was Vanessa's idea to keep an eye on me. Either way, I didn't feel at home. That night, I waited for them to come home. The table was set. Candles were lit. I wanted peace. I wanted us to be a family again. But when they arrived, Vanessa's heels clicked like gunshots across the floor. She didn't say hello. She just stared at the table. Then she said it. "Who told you you could sit there?" At first, I thought I misheard. "Excuse me," I asked, still holding my fork. "You're sitting at the head of the table." "Margaret," she hissed, "that's Daniel's seat." My son said nothing, just nodded as if to agree. I felt something break inside me. I had spent 35 years sitting at the head of that table. I paid for that table when Daniel was still in diapers. But now, it wasn't my home anymore. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "I didn't realize seats needed permission." That's when she snapped. With a sharp motion, she grabbed my plate and threw it to the floor. The chicken scattered across the hardwood. The sound of porcelain breaking echoed through the room. Daniel laughed, actually laughed. "Bravo," he said, clapping his hands. "The old woman needs to learn some respect." I looked at my son, my only child, and I swear I didn't recognize him. Something dark, something cold, took over me at that moment. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Clarity. Because for the first time in my life, I realized they didn't see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as a burden, and that's when I decided to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The next morning, I acted normal, made coffee, smiled politely. Vanessa ignored me, scrolling on her phone. Daniel left for work without a word. But I noticed something, their routine, the timing, the way they left their phones charging on the counter, the security system code written on a sticky note by the door. They thought I was old and harmless. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because before I retired, I wasn't just a mother. I was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital for 35 years. I'd seen people fake, lie, and cheat their way into sympathy. I'd also seen how easily arrogance could destroy people from the inside out. So I came up with a plan, not to hurt them, at least not physically, but to make them feel what they made me feel. Powerless, small, invisible. That week, I started my lesson. I began with tiny things they wouldn't notice at first. I unplugged the Wi-Fi every night at 2 a.m. I switched Daniel's car keys with Vanessa's. I added a pinch of salt to her morning coffee, just enough to ruin the taste. Each time, she looked more and more frustrated, and I sat there knitting, pretending to be the confused old woman. But that was just the beginning, because what happened on the 4th night was what finally sent them to the emergency room. For days after the plate, I let them believe I'd been broken. I moved slowly, hummed old hymns while washing dishes, and kept my questions to myself. Vanessa sharpened her barbed comments each evening, and Daniel learned to laugh at my expense. Their cruelty fit into the rhythm of the house like a broken record. Predictable. Loud and exhausting. But predictability is an advantage if you know how to use it. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to be precise. Revenge in stories that matter is never about instant gratification. It's about pulling a thread until the whole tapestry unravels, so the truth is visible to everyone. My thread was small and ordinary. Habits, timing, appearances. And the one thing they assumed I no longer understood, audience. YouTube wasn't my world, but the world had changed. People record everything now, and a single clip can become a mirror that shows who you really are. Vanessa, with her nails long and selfie-obsessed, recorded more of her life than she lived. Daniel pulsed with the need for approval. Together they built a fragile tower of vanity that screamed for a collapse. So I built a plan around their vanity. First I listened. Not in a creepy way, just like any good nurse, I observed. I watched Vanessa film her mornings, the angle she preferred, how she favored dramatic gasps and sharp cuts. I watched Daniel count likes, as if they were currency, and noticed how he always boasted about employers, promotions, and what it meant to be the man of the house. I learned when the mail came, who the neighbors were, which of their friends would post a comment without thinking. Then I used the one advantage they never expected: patience. The setup began innocently. I asked Vanessa to teach me how to use her fancy camera for a recipe video. She scoffed, then agreed, wanting to showcase her new mother-in-law bonding moment. Daniel was proud of the optics. The three of us would look like a modern, loving family. I pressed my lips together and smiled while she set up a tripod and lit the kitchen with her ring light. I let her direct me, exaggerate her lines, and position the camera over my shoulder. She loved being in control. We filmed a short clip. Vanessa made a point to film me sitting at the head of the table, folding my napkin with exaggerated grace. She laughed at my old ways as she whispered to the camera about helping her tame mama bear. The clip was going to be a hit, she said. I didn't argue. I kept my face warm and my tone chatty, because nothing breaks arrogance faster than the sound of its own voice spread wide. That night she posted it. Within an hour, notifications lit their phones like fireworks. Comments flooded in, some praising, many mocking. Within 48 hours, the clip had reached beyond our little cul-de-sac. People who never met me were calling me that old lady in the comments. Vanessa reveled in the attention, and Daniel basked in the glow. This was the exact moment when the plan moved from observation to orchestration. You must understand. I could have humiliated them publicly on the first night. I could have called them out, exposed their cruelty, and walked away. But that would have been noise. I wanted something that would make the cruelty crack from the inside, a private undoing disguised as fate. The next piece of the setup involved the neighborhood's annual block party. It's small and wholesome, a potluck, a local band, the mayor's brief hello, and always a table of neighbors who live 100 different lives but behave politely for 3 hours. Vanessa loved these events, a place to be seen, to wear her newest dress, to collect likes from people she barely knew. She asked Daniel if we could host the potluck this year. He agreed, proud of his wife's ambition. Perfect, Vanessa said. We'll show everyone what a modern family looks like. Bring your best casserole, Mom. I accepted. I said I would bring a classic. My chicken pot pie, the one everyone in our family requested for holidays. She clapped. Daniel gave me a patronizing pat on the shoulder that almost touched me. In the week leading up to the party, I did 2 things. I practiced the dish until the crust flaked the way I liked. I also made sure to have a copy of Vanessa's viral clip printed from her social account, not to distribute, but to study. When people get attention online, they start repeating parts of their performance in real life. I wanted to catch her mid-performance, where she would be most vulnerable. On the day of the block party, the neighborhood lawn hummed with laughter and a suspiciously cheerful playlist. Vanessa wore a dress that shone under the sun. She had the kind of smile that had been practiced in the mirror. Daniel walked beside her like a man who'd been given permission to be proud. I arrived with my pot pie tucked under a dish towel, my hair pinned and my face calm. Neighbors nodded politely. A group formed near the fence, the kind who'd comment on someone's haircut and then ask about their investments. Vanessa glowed, handing out paper plates and posing for quick pictures. When I placed my pot pie on the table, right between Vanessa's trendy quinoa, salad, and a suspiciously store-bought fruit tart, I noticed the small crowd forming to taste everything. Vanessa's followers were there in person. Mrs. Kerr, who liked to report funny things to the neighborhood group, a man from the PTA who loved drama, and 2 young moms who lived for scandal. It was time. I walked to the center of the circle, ostensibly to introduce the dish and joke about the one time I ruined Thanksgiving, which got a polite chuckle, but really to give them something they could witness directly. Me, the mother smiling and being spoken over. Vanessa, the daughter-in-law, taking the stage. Vanessa launched into a little performance of how she saved dinner and how grateful. She was to have a helpful mother-in-law. She slapped on a grin and leaned toward the camera, which I'd asked a quiet neighbor to hold up, claiming I wanted a memory for the family album. The trick was not the camera. It was the audience and the way a live crowd makes you act bigger than you are. Halfway through her story, she made the same joke she'd made in the viral clip. The one about the old woman learning her place. The crowd laughed, and I felt the same hollow ache as the first night. But this time the laughter came from strangers I could see. Their faces were the mirror I needed. I let her finish. Then, soft as a cat, I stepped closer and said, loud enough to be heard, "Funny thing about place," I said. "Some people think a place is a seat at a table. Others think place is respect. Some never had it. Some had it and threw it away. I'm sorry if I've been in the way of your perfect lighting." It was a small prod, a needle that looked like an observation. A polite silence followed, the kind that bristles when social scripts are broken. Vanessa's face tightened. Daniel's color changed. Slightly, a shadow crossing his features that I'd never seen before. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. People checked their phones. The neighbor recording lowered his device a fraction. Then, the thing I had hoped would happen, and the thing I never let myself imagine too, exactly occurred. Vanessa lunged, grabbed my wrist with an ugly, sudden anger, and shoved me. I stumbled back, my hand knocking into the serving table. The pot pie tilted. Hot steam kissed my knuckles. A cry of alarm arose. Daniel pushed through the crowd, and instead of pulling Vanessa back, he shoved me, an instinctive, ugly motion to side with the person who made his life look good. I felt the world tilt. People shouted. Someone from the PTA called for calm. 2 young moms started to cry. Vanessa screamed for everyone to mind their business. Daniel's face went ashen, he clutching his chest for a moment that looked terribly real. The neighbor with the phone, the one I'd asked to hold it, had lowered his arm and was frowning. He was the right man to record this, because the clip would show not just the shove, but the reaction. Vanessa attempted to recover her performance, but the taste of it was already off. Paramedics arrived because someone, maybe the PTA man, maybe a woman who kept a first aid kit in her car, called 911 when Daniel collapsed to his knees and clutched his chest again, beads of sweat on his forehead. Vanessa screamed that he was faking. He wasn't. He had a history of high blood pressure that he'd kept secret, a guilt-laden secret. I'd learned reading between the lines of his mother's letters and his hospital bills from years before, or maybe it was the shock. Either way, the EMTs treated him like he might be having a cardiac event. They loaded him into an ambulance as neighbors whispered, and Vanessa followed, hands trembling, lipstick smudged. The video on the neighbor's phone, shaky, real, unedited, captured the shove back of a man who'd chosen his wife's side, and the human unraveling that followed. When the ambulance lights blinked away, the lawn held its breath. I sat down on the picnic bench and felt very old, older than 65, older than any age I could name. I had not planned for Daniel to be taken away on a stretcher, nor did I want him harmed, but I had planned for the truth to be seen. Because the neighbor's video, the one I'd trusted by the small kindness of borrowing his arm, would not be edited into a neat narrative of Vanessa saved the day. It would be raw. It would show the shove, the laughter, the shove back. It would show how people reacted when kindness was not returned. When the first messages hit their phones that evening. Is Daniel okay? What happened at the block party? Vanessa's followers had already seen the clip. The comments shifted from adoration to outrage. The small seed of public accountability I'd planted had begun to sprout. At home, the house was different. Vanessa slept on the couch that night, rewatching the footage and answering mean messages. Daniel was in the hospital with tests and monitors humming like insects. Their perfect life had a blemish now, a visible one, and their performance would never look the same. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the old head of the table, and sipped tea. My hands trembled only once. I had started the setup knowing only 2 things. They would feel exposed, and the world would watch. I did not celebrate. I only prepared, because the lesson at last was gathering its pieces together. The next morning felt like a slow-motion train wreck. I woke before dawn and made myself move like a person with too many memories to sit still. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren that had no business in our cul-de-sac. I poured coffee and pretended the weight in my chest was only from sleeplessness, but the phones began to light up almost immediately. At first it was neighbors. "Are you okay?" What did I miss? Then, within an hour, a message from Mrs. Kerr with a link. The neighbor's shaky video had been uploaded to the neighborhood page and, because social media never stays local, someone else reposted it to a local news group. Within 2 hours, it was everywhere our small town could be merciless. Vanessa's followers wrote the expected things: accusations, defenses, and memes. A few people who had once praised her now asked brutally direct questions. "Why did she push her mother-in-law?" one asked. "Isn't that abuse?" another demanded. Daniel's name trended in our little world for reasons no one could have predicted at breakfast. At the hospital, Daniel's tests came back with a scare. The doctor's voice was clinical and slow, the way it is when professionals balance honesty with hope. "He had an arrhythmia," the doctor said. "Stress can trigger these things. We need to monitor him." Vanessa sat in the fluorescent waiting room like a bird that had had its wing clipped, her makeup streaked beneath tired eyes. When the doctor left, she called her sister and cried into the phone about how the world wanted to ruin them. Her sister told her to make a statement, to control the narrative. "You two are fine," she said. "We'll spin this." Control the narrative. That phrase had haunted me for years working in healthcare, when families would try to smooth over neglect and turn blame toward others. But the neighbor's video was not a polished PR clip. It was messy, jagged, and authentic. People trusted messy more than curated. People trusted what their eyes could see. Within the neighborhood chat, a thread started to grow. People sharing similar experiences with Vanessa's temper. Others recalling moments where Daniel had chosen optics over family. The small town's veneer, once left unchallenged, showed hairline cracks. 2 women from the PTA shared that Vanessa had once publicly humiliated a volunteer at a bake sale. Another man wrote that Daniel had bragged about firing a contractor who'd refused his demands. The dam of anecdotes began to leak. I watched it all as anyone would watch a fevered patient on a monitor, with professional distance and a quiet astonishment. I felt vindicated, yes, but more than that, I felt the truth moving in the world like tidewater. The incident at the block party had become an axis, small, private, but connected to a history that people could now see. That afternoon, a reporter called. She introduced herself politely, asked for a statement. I could have refused. I almost did, but I'd learned one more thing from those years at the hospital. When a story is already in motion, silence is often filled by rumor. If I wanted people to see what really happened, I needed to speak plainly. So I told the reporter a short version of the truth. I didn't embellish. I did not seek to punish. I explained that I had been shoved, that my son had laughed at the original incident, that no one should be treated as less than human in their own home. I spoke slowly, and with the kind of honesty people rarely expect from the elderly. The reporter's fingers tapped quickly. There was a gravity to the exchange that felt like stitches being sewn into the public's memory. The article that ran the next day did what the video could not. It gave context. It spoke of the block party, the shove, the hospitalization, and as crucially as it quoted neighbors who had previously felt squashed by Vanessa's temper. The headline was moderate, but the effect was cumulative. People who once nodded politely now reconsidered the images they had applauded. Comments that had once cheered for Vanessa turned doubtful. Local gossip shifted into a questioning tone. But public outrage is a strange beast. It can be empowering and cruel at the same time. Vanessa, who'd built a small following on the currency of being a perfect, modern wife, lashed out. She posted a tearful video claiming she was being bullied, that the clip was out of context, and that she only defended herself. Daniel, fragile with monitors and nurses' advice, recorded a shaky apology for his bad timing and insisted he loved his mother and that things had been blown out of proportion. The responses were split. Some rallied to their side. Others pressed harder. A few of Vanessa's most loyal followers sent threatening messages to neighbors who'd posted against her. I saw one person suggest that I was provoking them deliberately. Another insisted that I had planned the whole thing for attention. For a moment, the air tasted like coal, but the undercurrent was shifting. I noticed subtle things in our house that day. The way Vanessa avoided sitting at the head of the table, how her laughter when the phone pinged felt brittle, how Daniel's hand trembled when he reached for a glass. They attempted to regain control by crafting posts, deleting comments, and arranging sympathetic interviews. But the live video, the pot pie tilting, the shove, had already been seen by people who don't care for spin. The fallout wasn't only online. A woman from our church, a gentle, plain-spoken soul, called me to say she was sorry for the way I'd been treated and asked if I wanted someone to check in more often. A neighbor dropped off a casserole and a note that said, "Simply, we have your back." These small, quiet supports mean more than any comment section. They're the real measure of repair. At the same time, Vanessa started to lose sponsorship, deals and small local collaborations she'd been proud of. A boutique that had once sent her free clothes rescinded an invitation to an event. Daniel's promotion at work, which had been in the pipeline, suddenly slowed. Whether fair or not, the marketplace of attention had decided that their brand was tarnished. I did not rejoice in their loss. Watching people stumble is never pretty. My aim had never been to ruin my son's life. I needed them to face what they had done, to feel the fracture their cruelty created. And as the days lengthened into a week, the pressure built quietly, insidiously. One morning, a neighbor knocked on my door and asked to speak privately. He'd been recording footage at the block party and wanted to give me a copy. He told me that he had seen a version of myself that he'd never thought to imagine. A woman who had been pushed but didn't crumble. "You didn't deserve that," he said simply. His kindness felt like balm. That evening, as I prepared a small bowl of soup, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a short clip, shared by someone with thousands of followers of the shove in slow motion. The caption read, "When respect goes out the window." The clip spread like a stain. I sat at the table and thought about what comes next. Public scrutiny had opened doors for conversation, but real change requires something deeper than outrage. It required accountability. It required that my son and Vanessa look at themselves when they were honest, without the sheen of curated life. I had started a chain reaction, but I also understood that the next steps would test me personally. Could I stand by and watch them be consumed by shame? Could I reconcile with the son who had laughed at his mother? Part of me wanted to reach for the phone and call his name with maternal softness. Another part kept my hands folded, stubbornly waiting for proof that they understood. Because the truth, once revealed, does not erase itself. It must be absorbed and acted upon. And their absorption, the way it would change them, if it changed them at all, would be the measure of whether my lesson had any meaning. Daniel came home from the hospital 5 days later. His face was pale, his voice thin, and the proud edge that used to live in his posture was gone. Vanessa followed him inside like a shadow. Her eyes were swollen, not from tears, I think, but from exhaustion and the kind of sleeplessness that guilt brings. The house, once loud and full of self-importance, was strangely quiet. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to hold its breath. I waited in the kitchen. The same table, the same head seat, the same chair that had once started this entire storm. Daniel paused at the doorway, hand resting on the frame. He didn't look at me right away. Vanessa behind him stared at the floor. I said nothing. I'd rehearsed 1,000 things to say. Sharp words, soft forgiveness, careful lessons. But when I saw him trembling slightly, I decided silence was stronger. He finally spoke. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded. He sat opposite me, not at the head of the table this time, just a seat in the middle. Vanessa remained standing, clutching her phone like a shield. He cleared his throat. "The doctors say it was stress. They said I need to change a few things." His eyes finally met mine. "I'm sorry." The words hung there, too fragile to trust. I didn't answer. I simply looked at the two of them. These people who had made me feel small in my own home. And waited. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "People twisted everything online," she said quickly. "They don't know what really happened. They only saw a few seconds." Her voice cracked slightly. "I didn't mean to push you. I lost control." I folded my hands on the table. Losing control, I said quietly, isn't an excuse. It's a choice, and so is respect. Daniel lowered his gaze. I watched the video, he murmured. I couldn't believe myself. I looked like someone I'd never want to be. I felt a flicker of warmth beneath the years of ice that had built up. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of it. The first tiny crack that let sunlight through a wall. You both built a life where appearances mattered more than people, I said gently. You wanted to be perfect, and in doing so, you forgot what kindness looked like. It's easier to fix a table than a broken trust. Vanessa sat down slowly. For once, she didn't interrupt. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered, I don't know how to fix it. I leaned forward, the mother still somewhere inside me. Start by listening, I said. Stop performing. Stop filming every apology. Look at the mess you've made. Not online, but right here. Daniel nodded. His voice was hoarse. We took you for granted. I thought being successful meant I didn't need to think about where I came from. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. The kettle clicked behind me. A small sound, ordinary, grounding. I stood and poured 3 cups of tea. For the first time in weeks, no one spoke over me. We drank in silence. The air felt less heavy. After a while, Daniel reached into his pocket and slid his phone across the table. I deleted our channel, he said simply. Every video, every clip. Vanessa gasped quietly but didn't protest. He added, I think we need to start being people again, not a brand. That simple sentence, start being people again, was the first real apology that mattered. I nodded slowly. Good. Because life isn't about likes, Daniel. It's about what people say when there's no camera on. For a long time, none of us moved. The sun shifted through the blinds, making stripes of light across the table. The house began to breathe again. Vanessa finally whispered, Can we make dinner together tonight? It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of understanding. Maybe she was learning. Maybe she wanted to. I smiled, a little tired but sincere. Only if we all sit at the table, I said softly. And no one needs permission. That evening we cooked together. There was laughter, cautious, but real, when Daniel burned the onions, and Vanessa spilled flour on her dress. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. And for the first time in months, when we finally sat down to eat, the silence that filled the house wasn't painful anymore. It was peaceful. The morning after our uneasy dinner, I took my cup of coffee to the front porch. The air smelled of damp leaves. Autumn had finally decided to visit Ohio. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up bracing for a fight. The house behind me hummed with an unfamiliar quiet. No phone cameras, no rehearsed laughter. Just a man and a woman moving carefully through their morning, trying to learn a new rhythm. I wasn't sure what the neighborhood would think of me now. People talk. They always have. But gossip can cut both ways. When a story turns public, strangers decide who you are before you have a chance to breathe. That day, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Kerr from across the street shuffled over, holding a foil-covered plate. Blueberry muffins, she said. Figured you could use something sweet. She hesitated, then added, I saw the news piece. You didn't deserve what happened. Her kindness made me blink harder than I wanted to. Thank you, I said simply. Soon others followed. The young teacher who lived on the corner stopped to say she admired how calm. I'd been in the video. The PTA father dropped off extra pumpkins for the porch. Even the mail carrier, who usually just nodded, lingered long enough to ask how Daniel was doing. Word spread faster than I could keep track. People had seen the follow-up interview, the one where I'd said forgiveness is heavier than anger, but worth carrying anyway. Some called it brave. I called it practical. Holding grudges is hard on the joints. By the end of the week, the small acts of care filled every corner of the house. Flowers from the church, a card signed by half the street, a pie left anonymously on the doorstep. None of it erased what had happened, but each gesture stitched a small tear in the fabric of my dignity, Daniel noticed. One evening he sat beside me on the porch watching the sunset fade behind the maples. They like you again, he said, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth. I shook my head. They never stopped. They just didn't know the truth. He nodded slowly. Vanessa's been volunteering at the shelter. She said she wanted to learn to listen more. I looked at him sideways. How long has she lasted? 2 weeks, he said, grinning. That's longer than any of her online challenges. We both laughed, and the sound surprised me. It didn't feel forced. Inside, the house looked different. Vanessa had redecorated. Nothing grand. Family photos replaced the self-promotion posters, and the ring light that once dominated the living room had been boxed away. She'd printed one of the porch photos of us laughing and set it on the mantel. Underneath, she'd written in tiny script, "Family is the real audience." People kept stopping me at the grocery store, at church, even in the post office line. They wanted to talk about the lesson. They meant the one. I'd supposedly taught my children, but I reminded them it was a lesson for me too. I'd learned how pride wears many faces, sometimes even the face of a hurt mother. A month passed and the storm quieted. The online noise dimmed to background chatter. New scandals replaced ours. What stayed behind was the quieter kind of change, the sort that doesn't trend but sticks. One Saturday, the community center asked if I'd speak at a small event called Kindness in Conflict. I nearly said no, but Daniel urged me to go. "Mom," he said, "people listen to you now. Maybe they should have all along." So I went. Standing at that little podium with its squeaky microphone, I looked out at the faces, neighbors, teenagers, an old friend from the hospital. My knees trembled the way they used to on night shifts when the alarms went off. But once I began, the words came easily. "I'm not here to talk about a video," I said. "I'm here to talk about what happens after a moment goes wrong, because we all have those moments. What matters is whether we learn or repeat them." I told them that forgiveness isn't soft, it's stubborn. That humility doesn't make you small. It clears the fog so you can finally see what matters. I didn't mention Daniel or Vanessa by name, but everyone understood. When the applause ended, a teenage girl came up and hugged me. "My grandma raised me," she whispered. "We fight sometimes. I'm going to call her tonight." That alone made the whole ordeal feel worth something. Back home, I found Daniel fixing the porch railing. Vanessa was sweeping leaves, her hair tied back, phone forgotten on the steps. The sun poured through the trees, and for a heartbeat, everything looked simple again. I sat on the swing and watched them. "Looks like we're finally building something together," I said. Daniel glanced up. "Not just building, Mom. Rebuilding." The words settled between us like a blessing. That night, when we sat for dinner, no one asked who should sit where. Vanessa handed me the serving spoon first. Daniel reached for the bread basket and smiled. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was full. I realized then that the real victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in seeing them change, and in letting myself heal. Revenge had turned into redemption, and that felt bigger than any plan I could have made. Winter came early that year. The first snow blanketed our little Ohio town before Thanksgiving, turning the neighborhood into a watercolor of white and gold streetlights. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching flakes drift against the glass, and realized something strange. I felt at peace. It had been 6 months since that awful night. The plate shattering, the shouting, the humiliation. Now, the house sounded different. Vanessa's laughter came from the kitchen, soft and genuine, not rehearsed for an audience. Daniel worked longer hours, but when he came home, he'd take off his shoes, pour 2 cups of cocoa, and ask, "How was your day, Mom?" For the first time in decades, my answer was simple. Good. But peace has a way of nudging you, asking, "Now what?" One cold afternoon, I went to the local community center to drop off some old coats. Inside, a small group of women sat in a circle. Some were my age, others younger, their faces tired in the way life makes you tired. A volunteer waved me over. "Mrs. Walker, right? Would you mind staying? We're just talking about family conflicts and rebuilding trust." I almost said no. My story had gone public enough already. But something inside me, maybe that quiet voice that wakes you when the world sleeps, said stay. So I sat. I listened. One woman, maybe 40, said through tears, "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. She blames me for everything. I don't even remember what started it anymore." Another said, "My son only calls when he needs money. I want to help, but it feels like he's forgotten I'm his mother, not his bank." The stories poured out like thawing ice. Different words, same ache. And then someone asked me, "What about you, Mrs. Walker? You've been quiet." I took a deep breath. I used to think being a mother meant controlling everything, keeping my family in line, making sure they respected me. But I learned something the hard way. Sometimes respect doesn't come from control. It comes from listening when it hurts. The room went silent. I told them the short version of my story. The shouting, the shame, the healing. Not the viral part, the real part, where forgiveness grew in quiet corners, not on screens. When I finished, one of the younger women said softly, "You should lead these meetings. We need more people like you." I laughed it off. Oh no, I'm just someone who made her share of mistakes. But inside I felt a spark, a purpose. By January, I was volunteering twice a week. I helped organize Family Bridge, a program for parents and adult children who'd stopped talking. We'd sit in small circles, share letters we never sent, practice listening, the one skill most families forget. At first, I thought I was there to help others, but the truth was, they were healing me too. Every time someone forgave their child, I felt another layer of bitterness peel off my own heart. Every apology whispered into that little room felt like fresh paint over an old scar. Daniel came one evening to help move chairs. He watched quietly as a woman thanked me for helping her call her daughter again. When she left, he turned to me and said, "Mom, you're really doing this. You're helping people." I smiled. "Feels good to matter again." "You always mattered," he said. "We just didn't see it before." That night he hugged me, not the quick, distracted kind, but a real one. The kind that says, "I see you now." One Sunday morning, Vanessa surprised me. She'd filmed a short video, but not one of her old, glossy lifestyle clips. This one showed her volunteering at the shelter, serving food, smiling shyly into the camera. At the end, she spoke directly to it. A year ago, I thought my worth came from how many people watched me. But then I realized the person whose approval I needed most was sitting right across from me. And I didn't even notice. "This video isn't for views. It's for you, Mom." She uploaded it to her small but loyal audience. I didn't expect much, but somehow it struck a chord. People wrote in, sharing how they'd apologized to their mothers, or how they planned to visit home for the first time in years. Vanessa cried reading those comments. "I didn't think anyone would care," she whispered. "They cared," I said, touching her hand, "because you were honest." That moment, not revenge, not apology, was what closure looked like. By spring, Family Bridge had grown. Local news covered it again, but this time the headline wasn't about scandal. It was about hope. Retired nurse helps families rebuild after public feud. The reporter asked, "Mrs. Walker, if you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?" I thought about it, then said, "Don't wait for an apology to start healing. Begin anyway. Sometimes forgiveness is how you free yourself." When the segment aired, I didn't flinch this time. I sat with a cup of tea, smiling. No shame, no fear, just pride. Real, quiet pride. That night, the three of us, Daniel, Vanessa, and I, had dinner again. No cameras, no arguments, just family. Vanessa set the table, and this time looked at me with a small smile. "Mom, would you like to sit at the head of the table?" I paused, remembering that first night, the plate breaking, the humiliation. Then I shook my head. "No, honey, let's all just sit together." And so we did, side by side, equal, finally whole. Spring melted into early summer. The lilacs in the backyard had bloomed again, purple and proud, filling the air with that nostalgic sweetness that only comes once a year. I was pruning the bushes one morning when the mail carrier waved at me. "Morning, Mrs. Walker. You've got a letter, a real one, not a bill." I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron as he handed me the envelope. It looked old-fashioned, handwritten, the kind of letter that carried weight before you even opened it. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was shaky but familiar. The return address read, Mary Thompson, Cedarvale Nursing Home, Indiana. Mary Thompson, my sister. I hadn't seen her in over 20 years. My heart trembled as I sat down on the porch steps, the letter heavy in my hands. We hadn't spoken since the day we buried our mother. Too many harsh words, too much pride. I'd told myself I'd forgiven her, But maybe that was just another lie I told to make silence easier. I took a deep breath and tore the envelope open. Dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to write what I should have said a long time ago. I watched the news segment about your family. I saw your face, older, wiser, softer. You looked just like Mama did near the end. I cried for hours after that. You see, I wasn't angry at you for what happened with the inheritance. I was hurt because I thought you'd chosen money over me. But I realize now, we both just wanted to feel loved by the same mother who was too tired to give it. Maybe we both lost her long before she left this world. I don't know how many days I have left here. The nurses say not many. I'm not asking you to come. I just wanted you to know I remember you. And I forgive you. And I hope you can forgive me too. With love always, Mary. By the time I reached the last word, tears were rolling down my cheeks. Not the wild kind of crying, but the quiet, aching kind that lives deep in the chest. I sat there for a long while, listening to the wind rattle the porch railings, holding that letter like a piece of my youth had come back home. That night I couldn't sleep. Every memory of Mary replayed in my mind. Our childhood laughter, the way we used to sneak cookies at midnight, how she'd braid my hair before school, and then the argument that split us apart. I remembered every word of it, like a song you hate but can't forget. Daniel found me at the kitchen table around 2 a.m., staring at the letter. Who's it from? He asked gently. My sister, I said. The one I told you about? He sat beside me. The one you haven't spoken to since Grandma's funeral? I nodded. He picked up the letter, read it quietly, and then looked at me. Mom, you should go. See her. I don't know if I can, I said, my voice breaking. What if it's too late? He reached over and took my hand. Then at least she'll know you tried. 3 days later, I was on a bus heading toward Indiana. I hadn't traveled in years, but something inside me knew this wasn't a trip of miles. It was a journey through time, through regret and forgiveness. The nursing home sat on the edge of a small town, surrounded by maple trees and lilac bushes, just like the ones in my yard. A kind nurse led me to Mary's room. She's been talking about you for weeks, she whispered, smiling. When I stepped inside, my heart clenched. Mary looked smaller than I remembered. Her once dark hair now silver, her hands fragile like paper. But her eyes were the same deep green I'd seen in every mirror of my life. Evie, she whispered. It's me, I said, my voice trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached out, her hand shaking. I took it. And just like that, 20 years of silence dissolved into tears and laughter. We talked for hours, about Mama, about the fights that didn't matter anymore, about love that had never really left, only gone quiet. She told me about her son, who lived overseas, and the garden she'd started behind the nursing home. I planted lilies, she said with a soft laugh. They reminded me of you. I smiled. You always did steal my favorite flowers. We both laughed until we coughed. It felt so normal, so familiar, it hurt in the sweetest way. When the nurse came to take her for a checkup, I promised to come back the next morning. Mary squeezed my hand. Don't wait too long this time, Evie, she said with a tired smile. I won't, I whispered. But by morning, it was too late. When I arrived, her bed was empty, her pillow still creased from where she'd been lying. The nurse handed me a folded paper. She asked me to give you this. It was a note, short and simple. Thank you for coming, Evie. Now I can rest. Tell your family that forgiveness really does run in our blood. Love you always. I pressed it to my heart and cried, not out of pain, but relief, the kind that comes when you finally set something heavy down. When I returned home, I planted lilies in the front yard, white ones just like hers. Daniel and Vanessa helped me, their hands covered in dirt, laughter floating through the air. Who are these for? Vanessa asked. For someone I finally forgave, I said softly, and for the part of myself that needed forgiving too. The wind picked up, and for a second, I swore I could smell lilacs and hear Mary's laugh, faint but real. Maybe forgiveness doesn't erase the past. Maybe it simply makes space for peace to grow beside it. Summer settled in slowly, like a long sigh after years of holding one's breath. The lilies bloomed taller than I expected, white, elegant and fragrant, dancing whenever the wind brushed past. Every morning I'd water them and whisper, "Good morning, Mary." It became my quiet ritual, a conversation with the past. But what I didn't realize was that my story, our story, was still unfolding. Only now it was reaching far beyond my porch. One Sunday afternoon, as I was finishing up a batch of cornbread, the phone rang. "Mrs. Walker? This is Susan from the local radio station. We saw the article about you in the Family Bridge group. Would you be willing to come in for a small interview about forgiveness and family healing?" My first instinct was to say no. I'd spent a lifetime learning to stay quiet, to keep my stories inside the walls of my home. But then I looked at the lilies swaying outside the window and thought of Mary. She had written to me even when her hands trembled. She had dared to open a door that had been locked for decades. Maybe it was my turn to do the same. So I said yes. The studio was small, warm, and cluttered with coffee cups and microphones. The young host, bright-eyed and curious, smiled as I sat down. "We've had a lot of calls from listeners who loved your community work," she said. "But I have to ask, what made you start forgiving people who, frankly, hurt you?" I chuckled softly. "Because anger is heavy, sweetheart. You can carry it for a while, but one day, your hands get too tired to hold anything else. Not even love." The interview lasted 20 minutes, but the response lasted months. Letters started arriving from all over the state, even a few from other countries. People wrote about siblings they hadn't spoken to in years, children who refused to visit, parents they still missed despite the pain. One letter read, "Mrs. Walker, I called my mother today after 6 years of silence. She cried. I cried. We don't know where to start, but we started. Thank you." I read that one 3 times before folding it into my journal. It felt like my pain had turned into a bridge, the very thing I'd named our group after. By late summer, Family Bridge had grown bigger than our community center. We were hosting online meetings now, connecting families from different towns, even different countries. I didn't understand all the technology, but Vanessa did. She set up a small camera, taught me how to speak into it naturally, and soon, I was recording weekly talks, little 10-minute messages about healing, patience, and forgiveness. To my surprise, people watched. They commented, shared, and even sent videos of their own stories. Vanessa smiled one night as she read the feedback. "You're kind of famous again, Mom," she said teasingly. I laughed. "Famous for the right reasons, I hope." She nodded. "For love." One evening, Daniel came over with his kids. My grandsons, 2 bright-eyed boys with too much energy, ran through the house, filling it with life. Vanessa set the table, and for the first time in years, it felt like the home I'd always dreamed of having. As we sat down, the younger one, Max, looked at me and said, "Grandma, why do you always talk about forgiveness?" The table went quiet. I smiled and placed my hand on his. "Because, sweetheart, when you forgive someone, you don't just help them. You help yourself breathe again." He thought about that, then nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than I expected. After dinner, while Daniel helped clean up, Vanessa came to sit beside me on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think you were too strict, too controlling. But now I realize you were just scared to lose us." "I was," I admitted, "and I almost did." She rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't." The sound of crickets filled the air, and for a long while neither of us spoke. The peace between us didn't need words anymore. Weeks passed, and the radio interview led to another invitation, this time from a nearby college. They wanted me to speak to a group of psychology students about emotional healing in families. Standing in front of that class of young faces, I felt nervous for the first time in years, but as soon as I began, the words came like breath. "I'm not a therapist," I told them, "but I've lived long enough to know that every person carries a story. Some are loud and angry, others are quiet and aching. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, is what turns those stories into wisdom." Afterward, a young woman approached me, eyes glistening. "My mom and I haven't spoken since I came out," she whispered. "You made me want to call her." I squeezed her hand and said, "Do it. Even if she doesn't answer, say what's in your heart." Sometimes the act of reaching out is the healing. That night back home, I sat by the lilies again. The moonlight made them glow faintly, like candles. I thought about how strange life could be, how pain could become purpose, how loss could bloom into legacy. Mary's last words echoed in my mind. "Tell your family that forgiveness runs in our blood." I smiled to myself. She was right, it did. And now maybe it would run in my grandchildren's veins too. As the wind picked up and rustled the flowers, I whispered, "Thank you. Mary, you were the start of all this." Somewhere deep in my heart, I swore I felt her whisper back. "And you were the finish, Evie." Autumn returned as it always does, quiet, golden, and bittersweet. The lilies had withered, but their stems stood tall, proud reminders of everything that had bloomed before. I was sitting on the porch with a blanket over my knees, reading one of the many letters people sent from across the country, when Daniel stepped outside holding a small box. "Mail came for you," he said. "No return address." It was sent to the community center. The box was old, wrapped in brown paper, the kind tied with twine instead of tape. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. My heart did a strange flutter when I saw the name in the corner. Faint, but unmistakable. Robert Walker, my late husband. Daniel frowned. "Dad, but he's been gone for nearly 15 years. I nodded, my throat tightening. Maybe it's something he left behind. The box felt light but heavy in meaning. I carried it inside, set it gently on the kitchen table, and sat down. My hands trembled as I pulled the string loose. Inside, wrapped carefully in yellowed tissue paper, was a leather-bound journal, a folded letter, and a small silver locket. The locket was one I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, the one I thought I'd lost decades ago. I opened the letter first. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means life has carried on as it should, with you still finding ways to care for everyone around you. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. I didn't, because I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself. Before we were married, I had a son. His name is Samuel. His mother passed when he was a baby, and her family took him in. I tried to reach out once, but they didn't want me involved. I respected their wishes, but I never stopped thinking about him. You always wondered why I donated to that small orphanage in Indiana. Now you know why. It's where Samuel grew up. He would be in his 40s now. I hope one day you can forgive me for not telling you. I never wanted you to feel betrayed. I just didn't want to lose your trust. If this ever finds you, please know. I loved you more than I ever loved my own peace. Yours forever. Robert." I sat still for what felt like hours. My breath came shallow, my fingers resting on the letter as if holding it tighter would stop time. All these years, I had thought I knew everything about the man I built a life with. And now, this, a secret son, a hidden chapter. Daniel was quiet beside me. Finally, he said softly, "Do you think he's still alive?" "This Samuel?" I folded the letter carefully. "I don't know," I whispered. "But if he is, I think we need to find him." For weeks, Daniel helped me make calls, search old records, and contact the orphanage mentioned in the letter. Most of the files were ancient, faded, some missing entirely. It felt hopeless until one morning, I received an email from a woman named Anna Thompson, who worked at a local shelter in Indiana. "Mrs. Walker, I believe I know who you're looking for. Samuel volunteers with us. He never knew his father's full name, but when I mentioned yours, he went very quiet. He'd like to meet you." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. A son I never knew my husband had. A man who was, in some way, part of my story, too. A week later, Daniel drove me back to Indiana, the same town where Mary had spent her final days. Life had a strange way of looping back on itself. When we arrived at the shelter, a tall man stood by the door, waiting. He looked to be in his 40s, with kind brown eyes and a posture that reminded me so much of Robert that I had to catch my breath. "Mrs. Walker?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm Samuel." We stood there for a long moment, both unsure what to say. Then, almost instinctively, I reached out and took his hand, the same way I had taken Mary's. "I think," I said softly, "we both loved the same man." His eyes filled with tears. I never knew him, but I always hoped he was someone good. "He was," I said. "Flawed, human, and stubborn, but good." He smiled through tears. Then I guess I got lucky. We sat together for hours, trading stories. Mine filled with memories of Robert's quiet humor, his unspoken tenderness. Samuel's filled with absence and curiosity. I gave him the locket from the box, showing him the faded picture of Robert as a young man. "This belongs to you now," I said. He hesitated. "Only if you'll share it with me. I think he'd like that better." And so we held it together. When I returned home, I placed a new photo on my mantle. One of me, Daniel, Vanessa, and Samuel all together. The family I never knew I had, complete in its imperfections. That night, as I watered the lilies under the orange glow of sunset, I thought about all the people I'd forgiven, and all the ones who had forgiven me. It struck me that forgiveness doesn't just heal relationships. It expands them. It makes room for new ones to grow. Robert had kept a secret, yes, but he had also left me a gift, another chance to love. Later, as I sat in my favorite chair, I whispered to the empty room, "You did good, Robert. You brought us all together, even from the other side." The house felt full again, of voices, laughter, and peace. I realized then that forgiveness isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of every story worth telling. By the time winter rolled around again, I had learned to love quiet mornings. The kettle's whistle, the creak of the porch steps, the sound of birds picking at the frost-bitten grass. Small things that once went unnoticed now felt like tiny blessings. The house, once a battlefield of raised voices and broken dishes, had become a sanctuary. Daniel and Vanessa visited often, sometimes with the boys, sometimes just to sit and talk. Samuel called every Sunday evening without fail. We didn't need long conversations. Just the comfort of hearing each other's voices was enough. I spent my afternoons writing letters, not the kind meant to be mailed, but the kind meant to stay. Letters to my children, my grandchildren, even to Mary and Robert. Maybe one day, someone would find them and understand how an old woman learned that forgiveness isn't a single act but a lifelong habit. One afternoon, while Vanessa helped me bake an apple pie, she looked up from the dough and said, "Mom, do you ever regret anything?" I smiled faintly. "Regret? Oh, dozens of things, but I don't carry them anymore. They're like old coats. You hang them up when they stop keeping you warm." She laughed softly. "You make everything sound so poetic. I've just had a lot of years to practice." She paused, then asked, "If you could give us one piece of advice, what would it be?" I thought about it, then said, "Never wait too long to say I love you, and never be too proud to say I'm sorry. Both phrases save more families than any sermon ever could." She nodded, eyes shining. "I'll remember that." Later that week, Daniel came by with a notebook. "Mom," he said, "a publisher contacted me. They saw your talks online and want to turn your story into a book." I chuckled. "A book? Who'd want to read about an old woman and her family arguments?" "Thousands already do," he said, smiling. "They said your videos have helped people in ways you can't imagine." The idea frightened me at first, to let strangers read my life, my failures, my growth. But then I thought about all the people who had written to me, the ones who'd found their own courage through mine. Maybe this was the final bridge I needed to build. So I agreed. We spent months recording stories, polishing sentences and revisiting old memories. I laughed. I cried. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in decades. When the book finally came out, it wasn't a bestseller or a viral hit, but it found the people who needed it. And that was more than enough. The title was simple, the piece I chose. One quiet morning not long after, I sat in the garden watching snowflakes fall on the sleeping lilies. Samuel had sent me a photo of his own garden. He'd planted lilies, too. White, like mine. My heart swelled with quiet pride. I thought about everyone who had been part of my story. My children, my sister, my husband, the neighbors who stood by me when the world seemed cruel. Every single one had taught me something about grace. Forgiveness, I'd learned, is not about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing to remember differently, to look at a wound and see not the pain that caused it, but the strength that grew from it. I whispered those words aloud, just for myself. Remember differently. The wind carried them away, soft as prayer. That night, I wrote one last letter, to my family. My dearest ones, if this letter ever reaches your hands, know that I am at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I learned to love through the imperfections. Forgiveness gave me back my life. I hope you'll use it to give back yours too. When the lilies bloom each spring, think of them not as symbols of loss, but as proof that even after the hardest winters, beauty returns. Be kind to each other, listen more than you speak. And remember, peace is not something you find. It's something you choose over and over again. With all my love, Mom. Years later, my children told me they gathered every spring to plant lilies together. They read my letters aloud, laughing at my old jokes, crying at the memories, but mostly smiling. Vanessa took over Family Bridge. Daniel continued the book's outreach, traveling to small towns and community centers, sharing our story. Samuel became like a bridge between them, the missing thread finally woven back into the family fabric. They often said, "Mom taught us that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. If you walk by that little house in Ohio today, you'll still see lilies blooming by the porch. And if you listen closely, when the wind rustles the petals, it almost sounds like a woman's voice, gentle, warm and full of life, whispering, 'Choose peace always.'"